It's Friday, May 2nd, and this is episode 447 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Deputy Executive Director Martha Miller, joined by NSI Advisory Board member Lester Munson and NSI Senior Fellow Andrew Boreen. Today, we're digging into the potentially the most consequential shakeup of Trump's second term, the ouster of National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Yesterday, President Trump removed Waltz from his National Security Advisor role, marking a dramatic shift atop the National Security Council. Waltz, a decorated Green Beret and former congressman, is being nominated as U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. This was only announced a few hours after all of Washington went a little crazy with the initial news. This role is important, but carries far less influence over White House policy debates, of course. The official explanation points to so-called signal chat incident where Waltz accidentally included a reporter, the editor of the Atlantic in a group chat regarding operations in Yemen. The real story, however, is about power and ideology. Waltz's hawkish stance on Iran, Russia, and China put him increasingly at odds with a rising Come Home America faction inside the Trump administration. This group, including Vice President J.D. Vance and DNI Tulsi Gabbard, favors a more restrained, less interventionist foreign policy. The internal resistance to Waltz wasn't just about process, it was about worldview. Online influencers, especially Laura Loomer, actively campaigned for Waltz's removal and celebrated the departure of both Waltz and his deputy, Alex Wong, as political scalps. Loomer and her allies used guilt by association tactics, even accusing Wong, a noted China hawk, of being soft on Beijing. A staff purge in April had already weakened Waltz's position and his inability to shield his team from attacks that left him exposed. For now, Secretary Marco Rubio is doing double duty as interim National Security Advisor. This is the first time, because this actually has happened before, the first time since Henry Kissinger served in both roles, and he held both roles for 2 years. So I'm not sure, is this a Nixonian twist here in the Trump administration? Lester, let's start with you. What are the risks if adversaries like Iran, China, and Russia perceive this as loss of U.S. resolve?
Well, I'm not, I don't want to speculate on how adversaries are going to view this. Because at the end of the day, I think what the adversaries are watching is what the U.S. actually does in the world, not so much what we say. And for sure, this could influence it. I think Waltz is a pretty good guy and should be, and his involvement in the administration, I always thought was a total positive, even with the clear mistake over the signal issue. He's very sensible. He's got a great track record. He was a good congressman. He served his country in harm's way. He's a very, very sensible, smart, cautious guy whose views I think are additive to where the president is. So I think it's kind of a shame he's moving out of that position. We'll see who actually replaces him once they kind of land on someone for the permanent job. It's a little disconcerting to me that there are some signs he was pushed out because he was being too tough on Iran. It really makes me think, it makes me worry that the administration is pursuing an Iran policy that looks exactly like Obama's Iran policy. And by the way, without the benefit of multilateral support for the initiative. So we're in a weird way where while Iran's position on the ground is not terrific, we're in a weaker position diplomatically because we're not necessarily going to have Russia, China, and Western Europe with us. We've managed to alienate Western Europe, and we're adversarial appropriately with China and Russia in a lot of ways. So you need every advantage in doing a new Iran nuclear deal, and I think getting Waltz out of the chain of command there is not going to help that effort. So it makes me, the one thing I'll say is I'm now much more pessimistic about a positive Iran deal out of this.
Andrew, I would love to hear your thoughts. Do you think this is a shakeup, moving towards more restraint and more America first and isolationism? Or do you think, do you think this is a shift away from, or a signal about the viewpoint around more hawkish Republicans?
I'm going to kind of reframe that just a little bit. I think it's a great question, Martha, but I think, I guess I'm more of an optimist about this change. It's not just about Mike Waltz. It's also, let's take a look at Marco Rubio and the level of his influence. Lester mentioned it, and it's true. Henry Kissinger was the last time we had a Secretary of State that was simultaneously the National Security Advisor, or what nerds like us sometimes call the APNSA, Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs. And so I think Marco, as though I'm buddies with him, Senator Rubio, Secretary Rubio, and soon to be His Magnificence, and I'm kind of half joking, is now the acting administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, and the Secretary of State, and the National Security Advisor.
And the National Archivist.
Oh, yeah. Is that true? I was unaware of the National Archives. But, I think, and I'm not making a political judgment here, but Senator Rubio, during his time in the Senate, frequently was very much a problem solver. And aside from what happens for senators when they pursue executive office, historically, either of the two major parties, kind of the worldview that gets presented in a presidential campaign does not match those actions and voting records and bipartisan activities. So I'm not sure I'm seeing this as a move when you look at who does that backfill and how expansive that authority is. The other thing I kind of want to mention is, as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, there's been a lot of concern that the State Department's role in national security is going to recede, right? And I would argue that people are policy. And by seeing Secretary Rubio in both roles simultaneously, even in an acting basis, that would indicate to me that the State Department, although receding perhaps in manpower and facilities, is not going to recede in terms of its say in the interagency process, to which none of us get to see. It's a very Byzantine and secretive process by which the interagency arrives at national security decisions. And every president gets to make their own decisions on the National Security Council, how it gets staffed, how big it is, et cetera. And then on the Mike Waltz front, I've known him for a long time, and he is a Green Beret and a former member of the United States Congress. Both of those career resume bullets, I think, are going to serve America very well with him in the UN ambassador role. Green Berets are famous for operating by, with, and through partners, by taking adversaries and moving them into neutral parties on the battlefield, by taking neutral parties and converting them into allies and partners on the battlefield. And so, I'm using a lot of war construct here, but I think Green Berets really are, within the military, our greatest diplomats in uniform. And so I think that he's the right guy for the moment for the United Nations. And Lester, to your point on Iran, the UN, both parties have seen erosion of, years ago, Libya got put on the Human Rights Committee. And I would argue that's an indicator of kind of the fall of the UN's credibility when you see that. And so perhaps it's, look, I'm going to be the contrarian here and say this might actually be a positive development, regardless of whatever the root causes of these staff changes were. These could be the right people for a couple of really key jobs.
So, Lester, you served as staff director of the Foreign Relations Committee. We know what the Senate confirmation can look like. You are very familiar with this process. Given the circumstances, what do you envision will happen with Waltz's nomination?
Well, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. And I don't necessarily want to name names here, but if the person who pushed Waltz out of this job is really a 9/11 truther, there are 9/11 truthers in the Senate now, and some of them are on the Foreign Relations Committee. Like there's a reason to believe Waltz may have some trouble with members of his own party because he's perceived as being hawkish on Iran or not fully compliant with the current conspiracy theory of the universe or whatever. He may be too normal. He may be too sensible. I hope that's not true. I hope I'm wrong and I'm being way too pessimistic. But I don't know that it's. I'm not I wouldn't bet that he's going to go through the confirmation process unhindered. This is going to be more complicated than people realize.
So just to follow up on that, this is a fun Friday, right? So,
Is it?
I don't know.
This fun?
It's supposed to be. I don't know. So just, to your point about, these different factions and viewpoints, including conspiracy theories and the like, what about, is this kind of a setup for Waltz? Like, was he smart to, does this actually set him up to take the fall for Signalgate?
Well, I think that has been done and done. Like he's effectively the scapegoat for it.
Mm-hmm.
And if he set it up, maybe that's appropriate. Although the administration says they didn't think it was a problem. So this is pretty convoluted. I think it shows this administration is very disruptive. The president has a certain management style. It's hard to deal with. It's hard for the people who around him who work with him in a lot of instances. And I think it does. And I think this is my version of Andrew's point. Like, let's give some grace to the people who work in this situation and are trying to do the best thing for their country and are willing to kind of put up with a little bit of chaos, a lot of chaos at the top. Mm-hmm. And some, you're supposed to be loyal up. There's not always loyalty down. Yeah. It's a tough environment to be, someone who's trying to do the public good. So I'm willing to give a lot of grace and a lot of forbearance to everyone who's involved. And I hope it turns out well. I hope Andrew's right. And that, I like Rubio. I like Secretary Rubio. He seems to be managing this process better than anybody. And so good for him. He's a smart guy. I liked him in the Senate. I like him in this job. I hope he continues to be successful. But I hope they get someone and permanently in the National Security Advisor job who is sensible and level-headed and is not, looking to think that 9/11 was an inside job or something like that. I'm getting a little concerned that we're tilting a little too far to the crazy.
So on that note, Andrew, do you have any prognostications on who the next National Security Advisor might be, or do you think Rubio might follow this? The Kissinger model?
So I think we are in such a volatile and fragile political period that it's very difficult to make prognostications. And, let's embrace the volatility. And I think it's possible, look, I have a feeling that if all is going well with the staff as it is, my guess is it would continue. Right. If there's turbulence ahead, then we know from the past that from the first Trump administration that they make a lot of personnel changes in rapid order, and it frequently gets announced, publicly in really short order. So, I guess for my part, I have always thought the UN needs a lot of reform. It was established after World War II. And meant to be a voice for kind of the democratic principles and the democratically aligned powers of the world to exert influence. Unfortunately, it never matched the level of influence that the democratic powers had through Bretton Woods and the IMF and the World Bank and a system of currency controls. So, look, I guess I've always been an advocate for UN reform and ways to make the UN reflect democratic principles and values. The daylight that stands between the United States and adversary nations like led by the Communist Party of China in one instance, Putin's criminal oligarchy in the other instance, a horrible violent theocracy in Iran and all of their proxy actors, folks like North Korea now actively acknowledging they're sending troops to Russia to fight against the Ukrainians. And so, I guess, everybody knows my past. I've got a mixed bag. I've supported, McCain when he was Republican. I've supported Democrats. I'm now an independent. But my belief is let's assume noble intent. To Lester's point, these are public servants doing the best they can. And I'm optimistic that this could be a very good thing if we get some solid political operators into the UN with a view to, again, what's that model of how do we take these adversaries, slide them into neutral? How do we take the neutrals, slide them into partners and allies? and never lose sight of our values. And I think, again, that values daylight gap between communists, criminals under Putin, and really violent, the largest state sponsor of terrorism has been Iran as long as I have been an adult. And actually, I think probably going back to when I was like kindergarten. And yeah, no, I mean, and their proxy network is getting more active. Look, the Houthis just caused the turn of an aircraft carrier to lose a jet off the deck. This is an active, hot war. Most Americans, I don't think, perceive we're in a wartime footing, but this American does. And I think because I spend a lot of my time in Europe and live in Europe, I see it from a somewhat different perspective. And the Europeans absolutely perceive we are in a hot hybrid conflict. So, look, I'm optimistic, and I am pulling for the good guys.
On that note, Mike Waltz's ouster, I will say is more than just a personnel change. It's a window into the fierce ideological battles shaping the Trump foreign policy and his second term. As the administration recalibrates, the world is watching, and we are watching to see who emerges on the top and what the guiding principle of our security strategy and how this unfolds. So that's a wrap for today. Big thanks to Kelly Crowley, Taylor Lane, and Claude Jennings for making today's episode happen. And we'll be back on Monday, May 5th, and do not miss it. We're also on YouTube, so check us out there. If you like what you heard or saw, rate, review, and subscribe.